Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 824th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Maren Hassinger and Jessica Holmes. We're thrilled to welcome poet Sahar Romani here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter. Here in New York, we're on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but serve as a reminder of place, of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land that we're speaking from. And now it's my absolute pleasure to introduce today's guest and host. Maren Hassinger has built an expansive practice that articulates humanity's inextricable connection with nature. Through an intentional choice of material, Hassinger explores subjects such as movement, environment, identity, and race. The artist has executed recent commissions for Dia Bridgehampton, Socrates Sculpture Park, the Hirshhorn Museum, and the Aspen Art Museum. Hassinger will be honored with a two-person exhibition alongside Senga Nengudi at IVAM, Valencia. She is the recipient of the Women's Caucus for the Arts Lifetime Achievement Award, and her work can be found in many public collections. Writer, editor, and critic Jessica Holmes' writing features regularly in Bomb magazine, Hyperallergic, and the Brooklyn Rail, where we are extremely lucky to have her as an editor of our art scene section and our ArTonic column. Other bylines include Vanity Fair Spain, the magazine Antiques, and the Women's Art Journal. Previously, she served as editor-in-chief of the arts publication Degree Critical, and for nearly 2 decades, she worked for the Calder Foundation, including 6 years as its deputy director. And with that, it's my pleasure to pass it over to Jess.
Thank you, Chloe, for that lovely introduction. And Maren, thank you so much for being here today. And thank you, audience, for joining us on this beautiful Friday afternoon. Maren, I wanted to say congratulations to you on a beautiful show, which I had the pleasure of spending some time in yesterday. And as we begin talking, I thought maybe Chloe could bring up the slideshow so our audience can also have an idea of, the feeling of a walkthrough as we talk about it. Mm-hmm. So Maren, maybe you can begin by giving us a little bit of an overview of this body of work that's currently on view at Susan Inglet.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm calling it process because I'm sharing with you how I put things together, and I look at them and I move them around. And there is this whole wall that's now finished, that's all twisted newspapers, twisted New York Times newspapers, twisted and knotted to hang the full length of that white wall that's adjacent to the windows there. And I just wanted to share how I think about making things, why I make things, and how they're made.
Yes.
And I also like the idea of having a kind of dialogue with people who are coming to the show. So that's why the first few days that the show opened, I was there working on this wall with them. And I think that we had nice conversations and we enjoyed each other's company, and it was all very relaxed. It was not theoretical. It was not particularly intellectual. It was just sitting around making something. So.
Maybe you can tell the audience about the collaborative effort. Who were the people that came into the gallery and were working with you?
The public.
Mm-hmm.
I met them. I don't remember their names. We sat side by side and we just worked. It wasn't important, I don't think, that I knew who they were or where they came from. It was just important that we were comfortable together at that moment, making these things together.
Mhm.
In a very companionable kind of way.
Right.
It wasn't names, weren't.
Right. Is that an aspect of your process that you've done before? Had you collaborated in that way with on other projects?
Yeah, actually, I think I've done a version of that many times. Yeah.
Awesome.
I mean, it's one thing to have a very kind of formal group come into your show and look at your work and walk through it and,
Mhm.
have commentary amongst themselves, whatever, and walk out. And it's another thing to sit down with people and make things together.
Right.
And maybe it has to do with the fact that for so long I was a teacher,
Mm,
and I was always trying to help people make things.
right. Yeah.
So,
I imagine it inspires or builds a sense of community too. Is that something that you're thinking about when you take on those kinds of projects?
well, I don't know if I would actually say trying to make a community.
Mm.
I think I would. I think it's a little more personal than that. I mean, I was just trying to make friends.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Great. And talking about some of the other works, there is also this body that takes up a good portion of the main gallery called the Edens. Can you speak a little bit about these groupings of sculpture?
Well, I made them with my two assistants,
Mhm.
Cole Palatini and Josh. And I, well, we just had these three shapes that we cast repeatedly.
Right.
And they really helped me build. Josh left, really helped me build the situation where we could cast them repeatedly without throwing things out, so we got it done pretty efficiently. And yeah, so I mean, it was just very simple situation. We cast the pieces, they cured and dried, we drilled the holes. We had all the wire rope around from leftover from various things in the past. And we drilled the holes the proper size and put the wire rope in them, and there you go. And I'm used to them leaning in this particular way as blown by some kind of unseen wind, and it animates them. They're already pretty animated in that initially they come from an entire strand of wire rope, and I unply them from that strand, so they have that curve in them, that repeated curve that happens from being wrapped around something. And so they already have that going on for them. And then to put them in such a way as that they look as if they're being blown by some invisible sort of air source, I don't know, animates them.
Right.
But in a very natural way, I think. Like when I was coming along, I looked at a lot of, for example, David Smith, welded steel, very large sculptures. And often there would be this sense of motion in those sculptures, but it wasn't like motion from something natural, like a wind blowing vegetation, for example. It looked like, motion that was kind of forced into a situation because the placement of the planes and how they were, joined. But a lot of times I look at my work and to me, it actually reminds me of something that you might witness in a landscape.
Mhm.
And I think that's what I'm honestly trying to get at is some kind of relationship between us and land.
Yes. I mean, one of the things that really struck me about walking through this show was the way the sculptures, even though they're made out of these industrial materials, you've kind of coaxed a real feeling of nature from this steel wire and concrete.
Yeah.
And I imagine that is a long part of your practice as well.
Yeah, well, it's really intentional, and I think it's because what I've been inspired by.
Yeah. What is your own relationship with nature?
Well, I'm going to say I'm inspired by it, but I'm not the kind of person who camps out. It's like, oh no, a bug. Yeah. So it's more like I appreciate it. I appreciate being in nature because I feel that it's precious.
Mhm. Another thing that you touched on just a minute ago is a sense of movement in sculpture, which was another thing that struck me because standing in the, I hope the audience is getting a sense of how the show is installed because I thought it was quite beautiful. You can kind of stand almost in the middle of these different groupings of sculpture, and you really do feel as if they're moving, even though they're stationary. And then you have hanging down, of course, the vessels which do gently drift. Is trying to coax motion from sculpture another thing that you think about? And if so, how?
Well, I think they were always in some kind of suspended animation.
Mhm.
I don't really want them literally to, move repeatedly or obviously,
Right.
or in any formulated kind of way.
Mhm.
So the things that are hanging from the ceiling are blowing because somebody opened a door a certain way, or there's a certain breeze when somebody walks by, or, it's just all kind of happenstance.
Right.
I guess I do know that when I was a little girl, like 5, 6 years old,
Mhm.
and my dad had this 1955 Thunderbird. It was like the first Thunderbirds. And
Very
it was a two-seater Thunderbird. Nobody remembers this but me. Right? But anyhow, there was this thing that was this two-seater Thunderbird. And he would take me on rides, and I'd say, go like the wind, Daddy, go like the wind. Drive real fast. And I actually loved it. So I guess in some ways I'm recalling that experience, or
Mhm.
thinking about being propelled,
Mhm. Yes, these sculptures do have a forward sense of motion too, in the way they tilt.
Mhm. Yeah, usually there's always a direction of tilt.
Right.
Yeah.
Does that sense of motion and the excitement of feeling in motion have anything to do with your history of also being a dancer?
Yeah, possibly. But that history of me being a dancer is kind of fraught with a lot of unfortunate emotional baggage. Because I loved to dance. My mother put me in this dance class when I was 5 years old, and I just loved it. And but as I got older, I didn't develop the body of a dancer. I wasn't slender. I was bottom heavy, really. And I wasn't all that adept to, like being able to easily move. I couldn't do pirouettes, for example.
Mm.
I couldn't really substantially get off the ground. You know, there were a lot of things against my, that were kind of negative if I wanted to be a dancer, professional dancer. But anyhow, I went to Bennington College and I had first thought I was going to be a dance major. Well, right away, you know, like a blink of an eye. Oh, no, you won't. But the sculpture teacher, Isaac Whitkin, he welcomed me with open arms. So that's what happened. I went where I could go.
That's wonderful.
And where I was welcome.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And how did you, maybe you can talk a little bit about the wire rope that you use, because it's such a prominent material throughout your entire body of work. How did you come to use it, and you know, how do you see it? What does it mean to you?
I think the way I first started using it is I was like looking around for materials, you know, like you're in an art class and they give you an assignment, do this, do that. They don't tell you what to use or how to use it or anything. Just do this, you know, they give you a title or something. And so I was looking around in junkyards and stuff, and I saw some used wire rope like thrown in a corner against a fence or something like that. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting because it's very much like rope, but it's steel, you know. And then I think I picked up that scrap and bought it, you know, scrap material type price. And I started using it and figuring out what I could do with it. And that, but I'm not sure when that happened. I think the part when I was with Isaac was my undergraduate education at Bennington College. And that was pretty much a kind of classical sculpture class and knowledge, technical kind of place. And then when I went to graduate school is when I tried to get into sculpture classes and wasn't accepted, but was accepted by the weaving people. I don't know why that happened. I think it was because the professor, Bernard Kester, you know, looked at the kind of work I was doing and, you know, thought I could work with his class, and he accepted me. The standard sculpture people would not accept me. And I wanted to get an MFA because I wanted to continue being an artist and I wanted to be able to teach. And without an MFA, I couldn't do it. I wanted to teach on a college level. So without that, I wasn't going to be able to do it. So I went to a place that accepted me. And that was a really smart choice. Bernard was fantastic to me. To the end, he was fantastic.
So were your very early works in fabric or weaving or some sort of textile?
We started out weaving. Then we went into non-loom fiber techniques, which included all kinds of knots. Then somehow, I think around that time, I discovered wire rope and I brought it in and people were, you know, oh, that's good, you know, use it. You know, and then I began to use that.
Amazing. Yeah. I couldn't help but notice the similarity in form between the wire rope and then also your newspaper twists. It's sort of like a repeating form.
Yeah, that was intentional.
Yeah. Yeah. So when you're making the newspaper twists, are you thinking about the way the wire rope is also twisted?
Well, not exactly, because the wire rope gets that twist from a totally different reason. You know, it's kind of extruded. And we're twisting the newspaper like you might twist, you know, your hair into a knot.
Right.
But I do like the idea of something you know, a coil of something. And I guess in imitation of that,
Mhm.
that's the way I imitate what I'm seeing in the wire rope with newspaper.
And also coils and spirals, there's such a, you know, base shape that is found over and over again in nature, which really, I guess, sort of ties back. Is that intentional?
No, because I never thought about that. So thank you.
Sure.
Okay, now I'm gonna go, oh my God, look at that.
I love that. And here we have one of your rope and wire pieces, which you call vessels, which I thought was a really interesting name for these open and airy sculptures.
Yeah, so these are above these are on the ceiling and the walls above what's happening with the wire rope elsewhere in the room. And I think what I'm saying here is that all of these things are linear, but because of the change of material, like from clothesline to wire rope, you're going to be able to do different things with it. And this, the clothesline and, you know, uncoiled wire, are obviously much more pliable and flexible than the wire rope. The wire rope cannot be manipulated in any way. You can cut it, you can wrap it on itself, but without, you know, a lot of trouble, you're not going to get it to do very much for you. You can unwrap it and unwrap it and unwrap it. So like the one you see behind me, that is getting it down to its various littlest points. Then you can almost treat it like a line in space, you know, like something fiber-like. But when it's bigger than that, like the other thing you see on the wall next to me, this other thing, you can hardly do anything with that because it's just sat in itself. So a lot of that, you know, I try to cut it to sizes, proper sizes, so I can work with it in a certain way. But there's limitations to what I can do. I don't know if that answers a question or.
That was wonderful. These vessels seemed, from what I have been looking at all week, to be sort of a newish kind of format for you to work in. Is that true? The vessels that I was looking at from a few years ago seem a bit denser and made of heavier materials.
You mean the wire rope itself
Right.
seems denser and the vessels seem heavier, and yeah, I think you're right about that. So this is getting away from that, which is fine. I don't want to keep making the same thing over.
Sure.
If I can help it. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
sometimes you find yourself doing something and not even realizing you're doing the same thing. Oh God, that's familiar. Yeah.
When you go into making these works, do you have an idea of them in your head ahead of time, or do you make drawings, or is it more of an intuitive process for you?
I think it's intuitive in a sense, but I think what's really intuitive about what I do is if I find out I have a show somewhere, it could be at Susan Inglett's gallery, or it could be in a university somewhere, or it could be like, I've had shows at like Socrates Sculpture Park, which is outdoors. So all of those different venues require, at least for me, thinking about, oh, well, what's the ground going to be like? Well, what's the light going to be like? Well, what's going to be behind it? And is there a ceiling? I mean, outdoors, there's no ceiling, so I can't ever make anything like that.
Right.
You know, I could hang things from trees. I have done that, but it's not the same thing as hanging something from the ceiling.
Right.
You know, so there's things to think about. So in many ways, everything I make is site specific.
Interesting.
I don't really, and because I'm so inspired by, you know, whatever architecture or overhanging leaves there are or whatever, that helps me know what I'm going to make.
I see. Another thing that I was thinking about as I spent time in your show yesterday, again, to come back to the materials, the rope, the steel rope, the twisted paper, there are all of these cords, and I felt like there was maybe some sort of metaphor for connectivity in that. Could you talk about that a little bit, if it's something that
Well, I would love to say I feel connected to everybody. I don't know if I really am or not. And I don't know whether this expresses that desire,
right.
but it could. I mean, I don't have that consciously in my head.
Right, I see.
Yeah.
Maybe we can move on, Chloe, to the cops image for a minute, because this was a work that I spent a good deal of time with. You know, before I knew what the title of it was, I walked into this room, and just to foreground for our listeners, there's a sort of smaller back room of the gallery where these kind of sit in a semicircle. And when I walked in, I said, oh, this is so cozy. I feel like I've walked into a little thicket. And then later I looked at the sheet and saw that it was called a copse, which, so I think in terms of that, you've really nailed that feeling of walking into a nestled little part of a woods.
Well, you know, I did give it that title, but I wasn't sure what it meant.
Yeah, so
So I thank you for defining it for me.
you know, one of the things that that
I
really
picked
felt,
it up along the way somehow, and it just came out, you know.
I knew maybe you knew without knowing, because that's the precise feeling I got when I walked into that small room.
Well, that's very good to know without knowing, isn't it?
It is. And there's something about these works which were, you know, they were more or less as tall as I was, so I felt right at eye level with them. There, the scale of them was very human. Can you talk about that a little bit?
You were doing a good job. Why should I say? I don't know. I mean, I said cops, and I wasn't sure. I mean, I probably on some level knew what a cops was, but you know, right on the top of my head, you know, I have no knowledge. And as far as stacking up the pieces on these series of concrete blocks, it's like the only way I could get them taller. You know, because if I put them on one block, oh, okay, they would stand up, but they would be, you know, not quite 5 feet high, maybe like 4 3/4 or something. But if I put them on one block and put 2 or 3 blocks under them, then obviously they start getting taller. So that's the only way I could make them taller, because I had already cut them that way. So I don't know. I've just been doing it for a long time now, so I feel comfortable that I guess I feel comfortable in knowing that if it needs to be shorter, it can be shorter. If it needs to be taller, taller.
Right.
It has to hang a certain way, it can hang a certain way, you know.
Yeah. I feel like so often, you know, sculpture, when you see it now today, is made to be big or imposing. And you get a different kind of feeling walking through this show. You feel very much in relation to the sculptures.
Yeah. Well, I think that's also because they're linear and they're not volumes.
Mhm,
Volumes always make you feel inadequate,
mhm.
don't they? Like
Um,
large volumes, like, oh my God, you know, this thing.
It's bigger than me.
I gotta watch out for this thing.
And this work, COPS 2, has, from what I understand, a bit of an interesting history. Was this the one that was installed in Aspen? Is that right? Or part of it?
I don't think so. I mean, I thought I made it through this show.
Oh, okay.
I may have used the title before,
I
although
see.
I'm not aware of it.
Okay. Okay. Because I understood that there was a similar, I suppose, body of work at in Aspen that was installed, and then the pandemic hit, and it really wasn't able to be seen in the venue there. Is that?
Well, I know that the pandemic hit and I had to not participate in things that I thought I was going to participate in.
Mhm.
And that's maybe what they meant.
I see. I
Yeah.
see. Yeah. Well, and in any case, you know, these, I could really envision them being in a natural setting as well. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I think all of these things look very nice in nature.
Hmm. Yeah. Let me see. So, yes, maybe to go back to this, here is the newspaper piece that is in progress, and maybe you
Yeah.
can talk a little bit about, you know, just the day-to-day process of doing this with the strangers who become friends off the street.
Well, I don't know if they feel like they became friends, but they were willing to sit there and laboriously twist and knot pieces of the New York Times. And you know, when you're doing something like that with your hands and it's really laborious, you do find, I mean, maybe maybe you felt this way by crocheting or knitting with a group of people. But when your hands are busy like that on a task that you really don't have to pay attention to what they're doing,
Mm,
very easy to have conversations. You know, it's kind of like your guard is down or something, or you're all involved in the same activity and, you know, you're being friendly and you're being open and there's no, you know, you're busy doing something. There's no reason to feel uncomfortable about having new conversations with new people. You know, it just seems very relaxed.
yeah.
And I suppose that is what happened in sewing bees, that people would get together, or mostly women, I guess, would get together and talk about life as they sewed quilts or other things that were necessary for, you know, a variety of households.
Right. Yeah. So it is kind of continuing that lineage in a way.
Yeah, but what I find really nice about this is
Mhm.
that it's not gendered.
Right.
So that both men and women can come and do this and not feel that anything is being sacrificed gender-wise.
Mhm.
And we can have these conversations and, you know, I find that very satisfying and gratifying in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do too. I think it's very poignant that you're taking strips of stories, which is essentially what a newspaper is when it's all put together,
Yeah.
and twisting them into a different kind of story or storytelling in a way.
Well, different context entirely, I think.
Yeah.
You know, but as the New York Times, I mean, if you want to make something kind of like a poetic statement, I guess, The New York Times is really made for everybody. It has everybody's story in it. It has all kinds of writers, all kinds of stories. And every, like there's art stories, there's sports stories, there's, current event stories, there's all kinds of stories. And they're all put together and they happen every day like that. It's really amazing to me how that can happen. And then you have all these people together, all these disparate sort of people, because sometimes people might come with their friend and sit down, but most of the time it's just like single people sitting down saying, oh, can I join this? And we're all, sitting there becoming friends as our hands are busy twisting this paper that's for everybody, about everybody. And we're just, having a nice time with, our hands are busy and we're chatting, and it's very familial and lovely. I really like the experience. I really, really do. Yeah.
Were there any conversations in particular over those 6 days that stand out to you, or?
Nothing really stands out except that people seem to be pretty open about, their feelings about things. I mean, nothing really intimate gets, expressed or anything like that, but maybe stuff about the art world or stuff about what we're actually doing or stuff in the newspaper, Yeah, like just a very pleasant, ongoing conversation with no, like nothing that would make you go, oh my God, why is he talking about it? Nothing like that, just pleasant.
Right.
Yeah.
And when people came in, how long did they tend to stay? Did some stay all day, or?
Yeah, well, some stayed a couple of hours. Some stayed only, 20 minutes, like they came in to taste whatever the situation was and went out. And some actually stayed the entire afternoon, So, yeah, it just depended on whether they had other stuff to do, I guess.
Right. I think it's interesting that the rope pieces are called vessels, and they're very open and can't actually contain anything.
Yeah.
And in another way, the newspaper is kind of a vessel because it's now had all of these stories and narratives embedded into it.
Yeah.
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 And how about for the Eden pieces? What kind of stories do you think are embedded in them when you see them?
What do you mean by eat in?
The Eden pieces.
Oh, Eden. Hey, I'm like, oh, gee.
The Eden pieces.
Okay, so the Eden pieces are the hanging pieces. Is that what you're referring to? All the hanging?
Those are the vessels, am I right?
The hanging pieces are in the form of various vessels, although they're missing inside, so they're transparent.
Right.
Yeah. I cannot tell you why those are called Eden. Maybe I found something idyllic in them. I don't, well, Eden is idyllic, right?
Yes, it is.
It's the landscape that's mentioned in the Old Testament that had the first two human beings in it.
Right.
Before they were fighting.
Right.
And it was a place that was built by the supreme deity, correct?
Right. And
so when we think about Eden, we think about an idyllic place beyond measure, right?
Yes.
So maybe that's what I was thinking.
That's lovely.
I was thinking of a landscape beyond measure.
Mm,
that was so sweet and wonderful that it was beyond measure.
yes. I think what you've achieved so beautifully here is a feeling of a landscape. Again, I felt very, the feeling of standing in the middle of the installation, really, I felt immersed in a different kind of place, you know? Um,
Don't we all need to be immersed in something different?
That's right. I mean, I think that's part of what art is if it can, you know, move you to somewhere else that is, you know, outside of your everyday and get you to experience life, even if for just a few minutes in a different way.
I
Um,
think that is the point of art, actually, all the arts, not just visual, but writers and everybody.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's to take you away for a moment to realize maybe what the whole thing could be about.
And then maybe when you're transplanted back, you take away with you a little bit of a different way of thinking that might change your perspective on something else.
Or at least you have that moment of vacation.
Right.
I think those are really
I
important.
was gonna say, also crucial.
Right. Yeah.
And to come back to these Eden pieces for just a moment again, I really, you know, they were grouped across the floor in very specific ways, but I wonder when you install them and reinstall them, are there endless possibilities, or do you think there needs to be a certain way that they go? What do you
I think there's not only endless possibilities, but I think these have been moved a lot.
Okay.
Because I don't remember putting it like that. I mean, maybe, yeah, okay, but I
Right.
don't actually remember that.
Right.
So,
I found something in your art just across the board, very humane and equalizing. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about that, or if that's something you could speak to a little bit.
so you're saying that I have a humanizing bent?
Yes.
You
I'm suggesting it.
don't know me, right? I would really like to be treated with respect as a fellow human being, and I would like to treat others with respect because I recognize them as fellow human beings.
Right.
So if that's what you mean, yes.
Yes. Mm. And I know that you were a teacher for very many, many years. How does teaching play into your practice?
Well, teaching started out as being the only way that I could stand making a living.
Mm,
And I really had to make a living.
mhm,
But it turned out to be just like a lovely situation in which I got the opportunity to meet a lot of people, have conversations with a lot of people. And I felt as nourished by their conversations to me as I think they felt about my conversations to them as a teacher.
mm,
And so it was an important exchange for me all the time, getting to meet new people, hear where they came from, what they were up to, what they wanted to make, why they wanted to make that. And, my responses to that. It was always very, very interesting.
mm.
Yeah.
I know that you've done collaborations here and there throughout your career. Do you see teaching as well as like a collaborative process?
Oh, it definitely is.
Mm,
I most of my career was in graduate school. So I was teaching people who had sort of, decided that they kind of wanted to do, maybe this making of art.
Mhm.
So I was very fortunate because then I could have these like conversations like, well, why are you making that?
Mhm.
I wouldn't have to tell them what to make.
Right,
I could say, well, why are you making that?
right.
And then that would open up like a whole bunch of stuff.
Mhm.
It may have been different had I been teaching undergraduates, and I would have to be really talking about technical things or meanings, like general meanings of things. If you put this next to that, it's going to have this kind of meaning as opposed to that kind, but I was really fortunate I didn't have to do that. I got to have really intelligent conversations with people who were interested in what they were doing. And I didn't have to make them be interested.
Mm. I
So
mean,
I really had it good.
it's wonderful, and it sounds gratifying and life affirming.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It was. Yeah. But, after I guess about 20 years of doing that, I did retire, and it's been lovely now being able to spend all my time making things. And I have assistants, like I told you in the beginning, who I talk to when they talk to me, and that's good.
Is. And from this body of work, what is coming next for you? Are there things on the horizon that you're thinking about, Maren, or different directions you may take?
Not really.
No.
No, I'm just going on,
Yeah.
seeing what I think as I think it, and seeing how to do it, if I
Mhm.
can do it. Yeah, I don't have any plans.
Right. Yeah. So when you work day to day in your studio, let's say, um, how do you go about your process of making?
So a lot of times I'm making something for something or for someone. And that's the inspiration.
Mhm.
Oh, well, it's going to be on that space, or it's going to be outdoors, or it's going to be hanging over here, or it's going to be, or it's this thing where it's in honor of, like 100 years of something's establishment, or, so there's always something about where it's being made for
Mhm.
that will spur a response.
I see. I see. And these pieces in this show, um, were they in response to something?
I think they were. I can't because I've done shows here before.
Mhm.
So I know it wasn't literally the space that made me do this. I think it was a good idea. I'm happy with the way this looks.
Mhm.
I'm just not sure how it came to look this way.
Right, right. And when you are working, do you work on one piece until it's finished? Do you move around? How does that go for you?
Well, I think a little bit of both. I think the pieces in the back room, they may have been finished, and I wasn't finished with the front room, but when I finished the back room, then I could see how to finish the front room. I'm not sure that's exactly what happened in this case, but
Sure.
that sounds like something that would normally happen. Like you start on one thing and then you go to another thing, then you go back to the first thing, then you go back to the second thing.
Right.
Finally, it gets finished.
Yeah. Yeah. And when it all comes together, how did you decide to hang like the very light ethereal pieces with the more grounded concrete works?
You mean the newspaper twists?
Yeah, and the rope sculptures, the vessels as well.
I don't know how that happened.
Yeah.
Maybe it was me saying with the rope,
Mhm.
oh, look, We have some rope here.
Let's try it.
This rope. We gotta do something with it. I don't know. I mean, honestly, I don't
Yeah. I mean, that's wonderful too. Sometimes, it's good to allow for a little mystery in the making process, I think.
Well, I think it looks fine because
Yeah.
I think it suggests to you that everything is a line. Everything in here is a line. One is a steel line that's really manufactured in a certain kind of way. And the other is just like an ordinary clothesline,
Right.
I think that's one of the things that might occur to you.
Yes.
Um,
And again, going back to those repeating forms, there's something in all of the different kinds of sculpture that are here that are drawn together by this form of the chord, of the twist.
mhm. Yeah, there's something, everything is linear with the exception of the concrete blocks.
Right, right. Although they do serve a good purpose as like a grounding force.
Yeah, and well, it's good that the floor is also concrete.
Mhm.
It's kind of like they're related to that. They have something to do with the floor.
Yes, yeah. Well, Maren, this has been such a wonderful conversation. The show
I'm glad
really,
you
really,
could get through it.
I thank you for taking the time to speak about it, and I hope that everyone that's here today is going to have an opportunity to go see it while it is still up at Susan Inglet.
Yeah, well, I hope, if people go, that they enjoy.
I think
That
they
it's a sight for sore eyes.
it definitely is. It is a balm and worth spending some time in.
Jess and Maren, I've loved this conversation. Thank you so much. You've both been so generous with your answers and questions. We do have a few questions from the audience, and I encourage anyone in the audience who has not asked your question in the chat to either raise your hand or post your question in the chat, and we'll pass you the virtual mic. But Carolyn, my colleague, is going to ask the first question from GE.
Hi, thank you both so much for this conversation. So our friend GE in the chat has asked to Maren, when do you first remember doing the first artistic things when you were a child?
Oh, now it's been a while. That person asking that question might be 20 years old. I got to think a lot more. When did I have a primary initial experience that was a visual one? Is that basically the question?
Yeah, I think you can interpret it maybe, yeah, that way.
I'm gonna have to say it probably had something to do with school, and being asked to do something like, draw this or draw that. But or it could have been something that was more like looking at the ocean. But I'm not sure. I don't remember that. It's really a long time ago. And also my dad was an architect, and he had his drawing board in the dining room when I was a child. So it could have had something to do with that too.
Interesting. Thank you, Maren, and thank you, GE, for your question.
Great. I'm going to read a comment that was posted in the chat because I want to hear how you would respond to it, Maren. Jason Rosenfeld, our editor at large, wrote, "I took my class to the show and the nature element was strongly evident, but there's also a feeling of danger, the exposed sharp top elements of the wire. Seriously, they're like the roses of the Virgin Mary, but with thorns. And I wondered if,
Roses of the Virgin Mary with thorns.
yeah. So I wanted to know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I don't think I can beat the roses of Virgin Mary with thorns. I can't beat that one. Hands down, that's a good one. I think that, they're wire rope. They're an industrial material out of our industrial nature, which is down. I mean, we're not, we're industrialized. That's the deal.
I'm going to give Jason the chance to elaborate.
Yeah.
Hi, Maren. Thank you so much for this talk today. It's brilliant. I did one last year with Senga, and you came up multiple times. I think you were in the audience. But what I'm saying about the Virgin Mary is, Virgin Mary is often in Renaissance art. One of her symbols is the rose bush without thorns. She's that was my little comment. The idea that here you have these materials which have a sort of fierce identification with nature. I think of like waving wheat when I see them. And walking through them is a wonderful experience, especially because the show was so compact in a way that you were forced to kind of move around them and within them. But then that idea of, the idea of danger. I mean, I think about writings about minimalism by Anna Chave and the idea of, that minimalist art from the 60s, there was a threatening element to it in its simplicity. I'm not saying your work is simple, but there is definitely the element of like, you feel like, you might get nicked if you get too close to it. And I think that tension is part of the complexity, which makes it quite wonderful. But I'm wondering how you've sort of thought about that as part of your practice.
Well,
thank you.
There was this one piece that I made on dangerous ground a long time ago that was just a bunch of bushes that were crowded together individually, but in a smallish room. So you had to like thread your way through all of these bushes that had all of these, spiky things like the thing you see back here, except that they were all standing up. So, I mean, you really had to, wiggle around. So I guess what I'm saying by saying that is, if I wanted to talk about being on dangerous ground, and we're often on dangerous ground and we don't realize it, like we haven't done our homework, we talked back to the wrong person, our boss is going to fire us, we're going to be broke, we're not going to have, we're often on dangerous ground, but we don't realize it. But in the piece that I made on dangerous ground, you would definitely know you had to avoid those things. So it's literal. For me, a lot of times making art can be very literal.
Thanks.
And everything in life often isn't. Yeah.
Thanks, Maren, and thank you, Jason, for that amazing question and insight. Our next question is going to be from Carolyn. Carolyn, I'll give you the chance to ask.
Hi again. I'm wondering about when you decide something is finished in regards to this idea of process, or this idea of, the line and all the kind of movement in your work. I'm just curious about if it's a decision or if it's intuition, or maybe you don't see them as finished ever.
So the question is, how do I know when I'm finished?
Yeah, with a piece, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's when I say, oh, just throw in the towel, I'm done, Well, when the room seems full enough or spare enough, and so, it depends on what I'm trying to say. If I feel like what I'm trying to say has come across, then I'm done.
interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, the last questions today are going to come from me.
Okay.
The first one, Maren, is you collaborate and you've had, long-term collaborations with Senga Nengudi, among others. And I wonder what role collaboration has played in your solo work and in the work you make on your own.
For me, they're two entirely different things. Because if I'm working with somebody else, they have ideas and I have ideas. And then we have to work together to get one idea going. But when I'm making something, I have one idea and I just complete that idea. So it's sharing.
Lovely. And my last question is, the title of the exhibition process, and I loved what you said earlier in the conversation about this idea of beyond measure as well, invokes a slowness of thought that has thorns and has roses as you sort of examine two sides of an issue or like look at things from all perspectives. And it's interesting to see the show that way, and the way the viewer is sort of implicated in looking at things slowly and carefully and seeing things from various sides and angles and being implicated in a nature and in a world. And I wonder how you think about slowness relative to your work.
I'm not a fast person. When you're a kid and you're asked to run, the 50-yard dash or something, wow, it's really slow. But also, I've been really slow with other things, like, getting my career off the ground, doing well in my schoolwork took a while, a lot of things have taken a while. So slow is more my cup of tea.
Thank you. Thank you so much to both of you for this incredible dialogue. It's been really lovely listening.
Oh, thank you for having me. I've really, really appreciated it. It's been very, very, very lovely.
Well,
It's been very, very lovely. Thank you.
thanks, Maren. And thank you, Jess. At the Rail, we have a tradition of ending our community events with a poetry reading. And so it is my true pleasure to welcome our poet laureate of the day, Sahar Romani, to the stage. Sahar Romani is the author of the forthcoming chapbook, The Opening, selected by Kazim Ali as a winner of the 2022 Poetry Society of America Chapbook Fellowship. Her poems appear in Poem a Day from the Academy of American Poets, The Believer, Guernica, The Margins, the Yale Review, and Brooklyn Rail, as well as elsewhere. She teaches writing at NYU. And with that, I'll pass it over to Sahar. I'm going to give you, oh, here we go. Let's try this. Can you now unmute, Sahar?
I can now unmute.
There you go.
Thank you for that, Chloe. I had a little glitch there.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. Thank you everyone at Brooklyn Rail for inviting me. And thank you, Maren and Jess, for just such a generative and insightful conversation for this Friday afternoon. I feel so happy I could listen and take part. I was taking notes as I was writing. I feel very, just inspired by a lot of what you said. And congratulations again, Maren, on your show. I had the pleasure of visiting your show just a few days ago. And as I was there, I was really struck by the repetitive presence of certain materials, or as Jess said, the repeating forms. So whether it was like the wire rope or the news rope and the knots, and how the accumulation of these kinds of objects allowed me to see beyond them and see something larger. And I was very interested in that kind of sensibility towards art and art making. And so I wanted to then share some poems today that I think try to play with that sensibility of repetition and accumulation, and how myself try to see if there's a way to look beyond that. So I'm just going to share a few poems with you all. The first poem I'm going to read is actually a poem that I had the great honor to get published with the Brooklyn Rail just in April. This poem is called Here. Here is a shelf with cookbooks, dictionaries, and Rumi. Here is the cat. Here is the cockroach that killed the cat. Here's the cockroach the cat killed. Here is the kitchen window, morning garbage truck. Here in the bottom drawer of the freezer, compost, overflowing eggshells. Here is my hand in your hand. Here is the power cord and the outlet that doesn't work. Here is Sunday. Here, lunch, dal, rice, mango pickle. Here in my pocket, 3 laundry quarters and a receipt. Here is Amy Goodman on the radio. Here is the war, the war, the war. Here are my socks next to your socks. Here are the bills and a postcard with flamingos from Amir. Here on the top shelf, my first hijab, blue from decades ago. Here on the doorknob, the sun. Here's your blazer that's sometimes my blazer. Where is my phone? I have to call my mother. Here, a photo of us at Cafe Allegro 11 years ago, our hair long. Here is my Janamaz and the Quran. Here is the vibrator. Here, oof, the shower drain clogged again. Here is our 5th apartment together. Here are my eyes. Look how they rest in yours. This next poem is called When No One Else Watches. There's an ongoingness to the upkeep of living, solo performance to empty the dish rack, return knives to the dark of drawers, rinse yesterday off my face. How humble dust keeps me, no matter my accomplishments. I wake with fermented breath and am caught in ceremony, flossing my gums pink. Daily excursion in maintenance, my mother's favorite word in English from the French, to hold fast or keep, as in keep your word or keep track of birthdays, anniversaries, next month's rent, or keep my hand in your hand, keep faith. When air is no longer air, but elegy of a burning tree, my mother calls her beloveds, Salam Khuda Hafiz, she says, with such devotion, the cat licks its hind legs until the space between duty and pleasure disappears. I want to be that animal, so present, I forget beauty beyond the shapes I make. I'm going to read one more poem for today. And this poem, I was thinking about the title of your show, Maren, Process. And this poem was a poem I wrote with a very different kind of process. It was a process of me flipping through my old notebooks and looking for scraps, in a sense, of scraps of language, sentences that, you know, that were just kind of buried in my notebooks. And I pulled those lines out and took them out of the context they were and tried to create a new context for them and see if a poem could happen. And so this last poem is called American Cosmology. Impossible to unlearn arithmetic of the century. I produce, therefore I am. Armed with a grocery cart of personal tomatoes, I push my private property, spend the day on a leash, mouth unhorsed across a checklist. For years, I muscled into the chorus, ideal fictions of normality gathered in the drawing room, flickered across television screens, please change the channel. Tomorrow I'll upgrade my phone, split the bill in American cosmology. There's shortage of toilet paper and solidarity. Still, the money plant explodes across terracotta and windowsills. Sweat licks the lobe of my ear, and the cat is terrified by the fan's make-believe breeze. Isn't it luxurious? Even in boredom, my mouth sugar-coated. Thank you. Thank you all for listening. And thank you again, Maren and Jess.
Thank you. Thank you all.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much for reading today. That was really brilliant. Thank you. And we'd also like to thank everyone at Susan Inglet and team for their support. And of course, thank you again to Maren and to Jess. And we'd like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art, who sponsor our new social environment program and make daily conversations like this one possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. For 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has provided a platform for the arts, culture, and politics through our free monthly publication and public events like this one, our daily NSE. You can check the chat for a link to donate to support the Rail. And if you're free on Monday at 1 p.m., join us for a conversation with A.K. Burns and Ksenia M. Soboliva on the occasion of Space We Are at the Wexner Center for the Arts in Ohio. We'll conclude with a poetry reading by Tess Brown-Lavoie. And as is real tradition, you all can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a good weekend.
Thank you.
This was wonderful.
so much,
Thanks, everyone.
Jess.
Thank you.
so
Thank
much,
you.
Maren.
Wonderful
Thank
poem.
you, Jess.
Yes.
Thanks,
Maren.
Valencia.
Thank
you, Maren.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Jess.
Maren.
Thank you, Maren.
Thank you, Jess.
Thank you, Jess.
My
Bye,
Congrats.
everyone.
Have a good Friday, all. Bye.
Thank
Thank